Farage and Sky. Then he went full conspiracy theory stuff again. He's not far off from what they were saying in the 30s in Germany, saying why Germany lost World War One. Because what I'm assuming they're going to do, and I think they're already starting to say it on Twitter, is they've been stabbed in the back, which is an exact phrase from Germany in the 1920s to say why Germany lost World War One. It's interesting to see how much pushback we're going to get from this, because I assume long term he's going to say, if you'd vote me in, it would have been a success.
Okay, I can talk about it anyway, because it's just another grifter, isn't it? He's a cheap grifter.
My opinion on it more is the fact that he's shouldn't even be given a platform. He's not a former minister. He's not a politician. He's not an expert. He's as you say, a grifter. He's a con man. Like, why the hell are they? Why are they giving? Yeah, why are they giving him a platform? You know, that's the more the side that I would come from on it.
Yeah, it is really strange. But again, it's the I don't know. You know, the kind of that's the setting. All those people that you work with come from conservative backgrounds, so a view like his doesn't seem extreme.
No,
to them it doesn't seem as extreme to them as it does to maybe those of us who grew up in areas, you know, with a lot of immigrants. Something little like the street island.
What's interesting about what Farage said in the interview was how the Conservatives don't represent, they don't represent community. And he was saying we need to go back to this sense of community, which is ironic, you know, in regards to Brexit. But he was also pushing the, you know, immigration is, you know, it's not affecting people within Westminster as it is, you know, in working class communities. And he's very good, and this is a terrible thing, but he's very good at tapping into this. I'm just like you guys. You know, like the guy down the pound shop. Yeah, like I'm like this guy down the pub. You know, I'm one of you.
I'm just an ordinary bloke. I like a drink, I like a smoke. I'm proud to say I'm British through and through. I love pie and mash and kippers. I watch Top Gear in me slippers. I am down to earth like any one of you. But you really went to Dulwich, an expensive private college where the boarding fees are 30 grand a year. Then you went into the city where you know you made a pretty packet, picking up a bonus every year. No!
And he's very good at doing that, even though he's not. He's fake.
That's what Mussolini did. That's what they did in the 20s and the 30s. We're one of you. We're all of you. We're one big pie that looks after the community. He's pulling all the same stuff. No one's pulling him out.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to another Sunday Roast. We have two wonderful guests with us today, of course. Let's start off with Super Tans. Tan, can you tell us a bit about yourself for people who may be living under a rock and don't know who you are?
I make political content for the exasperated, mostly. So I make videos, I talk about the Conservatives, and just try to voice what people are feeling, really.
And where can we find you?
Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube.
Wonderful. And Terry, for anyone who's also living under a rock, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Or under the age of 45. You know, let's check out now. I mean, what am I? This is my 42nd year in the media. It'll be 42 years in December. Look at that.
Right.
And I still look great, don't I? You know, 63, blah, blah, blah. I never really got anywhere. So there you go. But I've never had to work for a living. I'm doing a fantastic stand-up tour at the moment. The Word is Terry Christian, the Naughty 90s and more. Clips of the Word, some of your favourite clips of the Word on a giant screen, and it's a comedy show. And I'm coming to a place near you soon. I've even done Ireland. I'm back in Belfast. I'm going to Belfast in September. I've done a gig there before, you know.
A quick question: Do you think the Word, in its original format from the 90s, would work today? If it was introduced today, would it work today?
In its very original format, as I imagined it, yes. I think one of the problems was I went in to do a show, having 8 years experience of doing music magazine shows on the radio and understanding, you know, listening to bands from the demo tape stage onwards. And suddenly I was working on a show where I knew the direction. I mean, I would have better guests on my Tuesday night show on Piccadilly Radio than they managed with 30 odd of them working, on a Friday. And I'd have better music on a lot of the time. So everything involved having to argue rather than be listened to, if you understand, because it was that. And we must know best because, we're sort of the posh scheme. It was a YTS scheme, basically, for ex-public school boys. So, it wasn't like they were all bad. It was quite tiresome to kind of, it's a collaboration, it's a big teamwork thing. And you're having a fight, for even the most basic stuff, like 8 weeks of arguing the toss to get Oasis on for what became their first TV, doing Supersonic. They never had the Cranberries on. They argued against it. They wouldn't have the Cranberries on doing Linger. Because at the time, the big thing at the moment, Terry, in London is acid jazz. I said acid jazz, what? White blokes with goatee beards playing old 70s funk.
I think it'd work nowadays because I think we're crying out for culture nowadays. We've got a cultural deficit, and a lot of people think that's to do with the fact that they've taken away, the dole, really. Because that's how a lot of people came to prominence, isn't it? Like they could actually afford to. Which is why there's an argument for UBI. But that what was it? The thing with Ben Elton that used to be on a Friday. Friday.
Yeah, was it not Saturday Night Live?
Saturday Night Live, that's it.
On a Friday.
They brought that back for one night and it was brilliant, and it felt almost anarchic because we actually had like a really banging bit of telly on a Saturday or a Friday night. But I rewatched The Word recently. Like I went back and watched the best of on Channel 4 and I was thinking, God, I miss this, because there was like the TF5 Friday, wasn't it?
Which was a very pale imitation.
Very pale imitation, but there was loads of stuff going on. There was like icons, there were cultural icons. There was just people that would just come on that were in the arts, music, telly. We haven't got that anymore. Our culture is just fell off a cliff edge, isn't it?
Why would the UK government be systematically defunding the arts and taking away opportunities from young British artists and musicians? Well, the answer simply is about power and control. The arts is about creativity and ideas. The role of the artist in society is to question authority, to dismantle power structures and reimagine a better society for all. And that is extremely dangerous to the brittle power of populist government.
Yourself, for anyone who doesn't know.
Hi, I'm Alex, also known as Political X. I run a YouTube channel and I'm a historian, and generally been getting into YouTube ever since the Russian debacle and interference in our UK elections. My magnificent co-host Max.
My name is Max. I run the Robespierre channel where I talk about British politics and Brexit in particular. Alex, what's our first topic for today?
Celebrities and free speech. Was Gary Lineker right to step out of the shadows and condemn everyone?
Well, I actually went on Good Morning Britain with Richard Madeley, and I was arguing against, what's her name, is it? Dominique Sanders. She's from about a mile down the road from me in Manchester. And she's one of these ones that keeps using the word disingenuous all the time, from these right-wing think tanks. And, where they believe in free speech as long as they decide what free speech is.
About free speech. So are you saying that he shouldn't have free speech, but you should?
Are you saying
that he shouldn't have free speech, but Jeremy Clarkson should?
That's actually factually not what I've said.
I'm just asking you.
I've said
so. We agree in free speech. We both agree on that, don't we?
Yeah, but there's a difference.
Hang on.
Can I just finish?
No, please. Can I just ask you a question?
And then you come back.
Yeah.
Dominic.
So we both agree on free speech. So who should decide on who has free speech then? You?
No, because that's not what I've said.
So what I say is... what I'm saying is I want everyone to have free speech.
Yeah, but you're being disingenuous.
Then I want to see... Then I want to see what they are saying, and then I can judge by what they say.
Yeah.
And so that was all it was to me with Gary Lineker. It was like, well, he's entitled to have an opinion. Also, they were doing that thing of building a straw man, saying, well, he said that our government were like Nazi Germany. Well, no, he said the language they used was reminiscent of 1930s Germany. But obviously, they always do this. Well, what you're saying is, and you go, no, that's not what I'm saying. And then already you're being gaslit. So I went on, and put up with Richard Madeley's overlong questions, where you're losing the will to live before he gets to the final bit, and then you go, never heard of that particular case that you're trying to paint me into a corner with. This is what I think. So yeah, it was interesting. I just, to be fair, I normally get a bit triggered because a lot of these subjects are visceral to me as a working class lad. But this time I didn't. And, you know, for this Dominique, I mean, I felt sorry for her. She was drowning from the minute she opened her mouth, so I just let her go. But yes, Gary Lineker's allowed. He's allowed to say what he wants. And not just because I agree with him. It's because what he's saying is well thought out. It makes sense.
It's funny how they try and go on down that angle, and yet, you know, they can have secondary jobs and also be politicians. So it's almost like, well, hold on a minute. I can go and work in this second career direction, whatever that may be, consultation or being on TV. That's fine. But for someone else to voice their opinion that people might listen to, bang, out of order.
That was the other debate in Good Morning Britain about MPs and second jobs. I remember when I was working at BBC Radio Derby back in the 80s, the local leader of Derbyshire County Council was David Bookbinder. He was actually from Manchester, from Cheetham Hill. And he was Elkie Brooks, his uncle. Remember the singer, Elkie Brooks? And he used to come in the station, and that was his big bugbear back in sort of 1982, 83, was Tory MPs with second jobs. And to get the corruption out of politics, even if you have to double, you know, the kind of wages MPs, you just say you cannot have a second job. And that seemed reasonable. What used to make me laugh when David Bookbinder would come in, and I was seen as a young kid doing the punk show, and he's the leader of Derbyshire County, so he'd come with like a bit of an entourage and have everybody, you've got a big guest in now. He'd always come in to speak to me because he was a big City fan and I was a United fan, so he'd come in to try and annoy me. It was quite funny.
Tan, what's your take on Gary Lineker?
Well, the interview was hilarious, wasn't it? It was like Alan Partridge interviews.
Says he's getting death threats online. People calling for his execution.
Well, I think politicians get that all the time.
Well, I was going to say, is that big a deal?
No.
You serve simply to alarm the public and to inflame the farmers, which is exactly what you've done. Why don't you just apologise and make it nice and simple?
Thought that'd fill you.
Not so brave as you.
Something sort of bizarre about that, isn't there? Because Zelensky used to be an actor and he played a role as a president, didn't he? Acting, and now he is president.
Yeah. Story within the story within the story. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Like Russian dolls.
Let's not say Russian. Thank you very
If you're
much.
new to the channel, be sure to click the subscribe button.
And I think Lineker handled it perfectly because he's just like a mild-mannered fella. He was just like water, wasn't he? He's like, no, that's not what I said. That's not what I said. And Madeley's not used to, I think, that kind of pushback. But generally speaking, he's a freelancer for the BBC. It's not like, you know, it's his job. But then there's myriad issues with the BBC anyway. If they're talking about bias and people having political opinions, there's at least 3 Tories heading up the BBC. 1 less now. Sharp's gone. So absolutely, he's got every right to speak about what matters, and this is exactly what people need, and that's why there's so much pushback against it. We need celebrities to have a voice, because they're trusted figures, so they might be able to, they have a degree of influence, of course, but then of course these celebrities are putting themselves on the line by doing this, because the Mail and the tabloids will come for them and smear them by doing it. So it's not like it's it's quite a selfless thing to do, I think, in many ways. Because
again, he can't help but be on the right side of history. You know, if you think
this is
about
the thing. Yeah, he's on the right side of history.
And also, Lineker doesn't need the money anymore, so he doesn't care if he push back
on him. Of course, exactly. He's got no skin in the game, is he? I mean, but apart from the fact that he grew up as his dad was a greengrocer, wasn't it? His dad
working on the market. A greengrocer's store on the market.
What's also interesting about this is how the BBC reacted, but they didn't react to Andrew Neil. Talking about Brexit, talking about immigration, Alan Sugar as well. But Andrew Neil also runs The Spectator, so this is in a sense in in competition with the BBC, or at least some parts of the BBC. But for me, the worst part was that Gary Lineker was brought up in the House of Commons by the Tories. Like, why did they do that? Like, this is meant to be. Why was this? Why was a celebrity and his free speech being mentioned in the House of Commons by the Tories?
It's because he's cutting through.
Well, I mean, also, it's as I said when we did the debate on Good Morning Britain, I said it's not as if Gary Lineker going on a Match of the Day and saying, well, before highlights of Manchester City and Arsenal, can I just say that I really disagree with Suella Braverman.
But Gary does have a bit of a bias towards Leicester. I mean, he did actually turn up in his boxes because he made the outlandish bet at the beginning of the season that Leicester wouldn't win the title, and if they did, he'd turn up naked and present the show. So there is that. It's interesting how there's that element of bias that's within Match of the Day that's sort of allowed, but then bringing in politics outside of that isn't, and it's not employed by the BBC.
Well, I mean,
that's another thing.
Fans know that somebody supports somebody. So obviously, you know, Jimmy Hill, Fulham, Coventry, who'd been the thing of, but you know, obviously now it's more banterish, you know, because you've got Alan Shearer there as a Newcastle lad, you know, lifelong Newcastle fan, you know, all of that kind of stuff. So obviously, you know, for Lineker, I mean, Leicester, you know, we know who he is, so that's relatable. That you like your own team, you know. I'm not going to sit there seething, going, "Oh my God, how can Jamie Carragher be so biased in favour of Liverpool?" Him having played for Liverpool, coming from Liverpool, although he was actually an Everton fan.
Everton supporter, yeah. He's not.
The big myth about United was, about Manchester was that there was as many City fans as United fans in the city, whereas in fact they've always been outnumbered 3 or 4 to 1. Whereas in Liverpool, it is more 50-50 Everton-Liverpool.
So just talking about people on the right side of history, what about people on the wrong side? Farage, what's
the grifter in chief?
Failure.
What a twat.
I will say just one thing before we skip onto that, just because in Mein Kampf it says foreign people are invading. That's said by Suella Braverman, who has a Jewish husband, and yet is telling everyone that she's not using language, even though you find that language in Mein Kampf, which was written in the 1920s. The other one that's always interesting is David Cameron calling people coming over from Africa a swarm, which he said, which is also in Mein Kampf as a description of Jewish people. And it's really interesting. I've not seen anyone, including Richard Madeley, who I think, as you said, he seems like a nice enough guy, is a total moron, along with a lot of the researchers in ITV. Because if they can't figure out that one of the most prolific and horribly prolific books from the 1920s has these words, then it says to me that their researchers aren't up to scratch, and neither are the presenters. And I've actually said to Max off air, why are they hiring?
So it's chasing ratings. I mean, I did a kind of moral issues and religious show called It's My Life for 6 series. And so we'd be about a social issue, but because we're funded by the religion department, ITV, we'd have to make part 4 of an hour show about religion. So if we were going to get, and this is where we were naughty, really, if we were going to get somebody who was, let's say, was a Muslim in, it always made better TV to get some kind of swivel-eyed Lou, you know, bust in from the 11th century, banging on about infidels. You know what I mean? And immorality. And maybe the odd beheading, you know, the sentence for apostasy is death. That was always much more exciting than getting some lad from Bolton going, it might say that, but we don't really do that.
They're not thinking about the consequences of that and how that normalises dehumanising language, because what you're describing there is dehumanising language, which was exactly what happened
But it's like those TV debate things are a bit of drama, and that everyone's under pressure to get ratings. And in some ways, they take, you know, the Suella. How much do they really believe this stuff, and how much of it is just purely a grift for power? Do you know what I mean?
I think Jim Jeffries.
Of course, it's a grift for power.
I think Jim Jeffries said it quite well to your favourite Terry Piers Morgan on the Bill Maher show in the States.
No, they wouldn't be doing this shit with Russia. Are you crazy?
Calm down, Bill. There is no Muslim ban. If there was,
fuck off.
Sorry, why don't we
fuck off?
Okay.
It's a fucking Muslim ban.
Okay.
He said there was a Muslim
This is the point. This isn't talk about the hysteria. I'm talking about 85% of the world's Muslims are allowed into the country.
This is what you do, Pierce. You say he hasn't done this, he hasn't done that, he's not going to do all these things. Give him a fucking chance, mate.
And
you know what I mean?
And why not?
Hitler didn't kill the Jews on the first day. He worked up to it.
Mate.
I have to stop you.
That is the exact ridiculous, hysterical, over-the-top nonsense.
If
that
people
is,
got
I'm afraid,
hysterical in
making
Germany
people like you
right away,
ridiculous.
then it wouldn't have...
He's not the new Hitler.
You just like that you won The Apprentice and you have a famous friend, mate. That's all you fucking like.
Can I say one thing?
I know
That's all you like.
That's all you're losing your audience.
I'm not losing my audience.
Because you're sounding unpleasant.
Am I losing
you're also not basing...
And that's the thing. You start off with the language, and then this ties in with free speech, but it also ties in quite nicely with Farage. Is that the reason that? And I'm going to throw this over to Max. Max, is this the reason why Farage is on? Is it because he's controversial and he gets ratings?
Well, I think it's two things. Allegedly, he was the one who put himself forward for interviews. So in the run-up to Brexit, when the BBC or ITV or whoever were looking for somebody to bring on to a show, Farage was always available. So that meant that he was able to present himself and his position on every topic. So if they were talking about the NHS, he was there to talk about, well, if we leave the EU, we'll get rid of all these waiting lists, we'll be able to get rid of all these foreigners who are putting pressure on the NHS. If it was talking about unemployment, he said, well, if we get rid of all these foreigners, we'll be able to put British people into these jobs. So he was always there, and he became part of the furniture. He became part of the narrative. And people associated him with Brexit. They associated him also with politics, even though he was a member of the European Parliament. But he didn't have a real role in British politics. But for some reason, he was always there. And I think part of it was because he was always available. So if they were desperate, we need somebody at the last minute, bring Farage on. And he was able to use that to his advantage. And he became a household name because of that. But
it's quite funny how he lost to a dolphin.
He's just a con man, as far as I'm concerned. He's a con man. And what you were describing there is like one of the key components of building a brand, like the whole populism aspect. Very similar to what Johnson did, except, he's like a pound shop Johnson, really. But yeah, he was just, instead of doing the actual job that he was being paid for, and he is still getting money for to this day, as an MEP, he was too busy fanning around on camera, smoking a cigarette, thinking, pretending he's like a working class hero when he's not. Very similar to what Johnson did. And by trying to make himself relatable in that way, he was able to tell those barefaced lies, get away with it.
Well, I mean, but he's just Dave down the pub. He's like Nigel the golf club bore. So because he's there, spouting simplistic drivel while waving half a pint around in a glass and calling that common sense. You've got your Dave down the pub type. So, oh, that's right. There's too many of them over here. But just these absolute idiots. And those sort of blokes who think they're the cleverest man that they've ever met. And yet they've never read anything. They go, well, yeah, you give me all those facts, but what I reckon is, and it's like, well, I think the moon's made of cheese, mate. I reckon that. And there's no logic, there's no helping these people, and you do sometimes wonder if the human race isn't actually branching out. The way we obviously come
a new
one
species.
Lot of primates, one lot stayed eating bananas, swinging in the trees. The other lot ended up going on the ground and inventing the
wheel. You have a lot of like pub Daves that just kind of hang around.
Well, I mean, listen, for some of them, it's like this idea. Obviously, we still live in a very class-heavy country, so this idea of like appealing to a certain section of the work, when you grew up on council estates or you grew up in working-class areas, it was always noticeable that there weren't that many working-class Tories, but the ones that there were absolutely stupid. They weren't bright people.
I agree. I grew up in a proper.
They thought it made them better than anyone else. I mean, in the South, you got more of them because they were kind of bribed by Thatcher, because obviously their council houses were worth a lot more, so they could sell up their scrubby council house and move out to a semi-detached in Essex in the sunshine. You know what I mean?
That's exactly what happened in our area. Like, some people bought their council houses, made a bit of money, and then thought that they were like a Tory, or they were like going to ever be like the rich people, but they never would. Like it just, that's how they get you. That's how they con you. And the thing with Farage really reminds me of how Kelvin Mackenzie gets people with like this, or used to get people with the Sun, you know, and the description is so horrific of how he described Sun readers in, I don't know if you've ever seen the description of how he described Sun readers, but I can't say it because it's so full of horrific slurs. But he describes the readers as a bit of a fascist, you know, the guy down the pub who, you know, and, you know, they were so simplistic in terms of like headlines and getting people to believe the headlines.
2/3 of Sun readers voted Labour most of the time.
Back then.
Yeah, well, I mean, the thing is, a lot of people would just get a newspaper for the telly page and the football at the back. They weren't bothered about the stuff. You know what I mean? Yeah. Well, I don't even know if that was that big a thing. You know.
I hate to say it, but the Sun used to actually get decent pundits to write in the back. Because I remember Harry Redknapp used to be in the back of the Sun.
You know, a lot of those papers would sell themselves on what was on the back page. You know.
Yeah, but in the middle, it was all sensationalism and horrific misogyny. I mean, the way they.
Well, I don't know. I didn't read it like you, Tom.
I didn't read it, God, but it was always on the side round my granddad's house or my.
Oh, your granddad read the Sun. Now it's all coming out.
Maybe it was just for page 3.
But he was a proper working class salt of the earth guy. He was still climbing up trees until he was 70. You know, he was a landscaper. And he, you know, they was always just around when I was growing up.
He was a regular working class guy. He was a landscaper. You know, it's not exactly a miner, is it?
Well, no, I don't mean like. I mean, I don't mean like landscapers. He did gardens.
Of the working class movement.
He did gardens.
The local landscapers trade union.
I'm sorry that there's no mines in Essex, Terry. But you know, what can I do about that? If there hadn't been, he'd have been downer.
It's just
Jesus, yes. We're flat here, mate. We've got nothing.
Union.
Landscape.
Are we getting the north-south divide again? I'm more working. I almost felt Terry there was like an element of the Monty Python sketch. Oh,
an element. This is your middle class coming out now, Alex.
Right, okay.
You know, you've got nothing to be ashamed of.
How mouldy was your house? My house was this mouldy.
You had mold?
We had pneumonia 10 times. No, but seriously, I grew up in the shadows of like Felsted School, like big. My anti-Tory like sentiment came out really young. Like I lived in a little free up, free down, and right in front of us was one of the most prestigious schools then in the country. You know, so it was a massive class divide. Like we were.
Could you not go to that school?
Did I fuck? No.
well, whereas you know, we were like properly poor. Yeah, I went to St. Bede's Catholic Grammar School in Manchester, which is like the Catholic equivalent of Manchester Grammar. And it went private in the mid-'80s. So when anyone trolls my Wikipedia, they go, look at you pretend working class. You went to a private school. And you're going, it wasn't bloody private then, was it?
It didn't. Yeah, because
they clever when I went there.
That's how they try and get loads of the politicians as well.
Keir Starmer, yeah.
Starmer's school change. But no, it was 15 at the time. I think back then it was like 15, 16 grand a year even then in the 90s to go to that school. I went to like the little comp down the road and we had to be bussed into a different town, into like a local town to go to a comprehensive secondary. So yeah.
Well, can I ask, like, for example, in Italy, there are private schools, but it's normally for people who can't pass their exams.
What?
If you can't pass the exams, you go to the private school, and you know, you pay and then you pass the exams.
There is a touch of that with a lot of private schools where it's basically for people's fit kids to get them through an exam.
Max, did you feel like that was the case? Did you have how does it feel with the class system over in Ireland? Like, is it something you noticed as much?
It's difficult to put your finger on because there's a thing of money. So there isn't really a class system in Ireland, but there is a money thing. So what happened during the Celtic Tigers? So the Celtic Tigers, when there was the economic boom in Ireland in the late 90s and early 2010, 2000 noughties or whatever you call it, before the crash, what you notice if anyone who, and Terry has probably been back to Ireland a few times, but if you go and have a look around Ireland, you see a lot of this emulation of the Lord's manor. So when Ireland was under British rule, you had the landowner who lived in a mansion, and the tenant farmers who lived around the area, and they lived in little like shacks, but little cottages. But what you had now in the last number of years is you had rich people trying to emulate that, and you had and I know people in Ireland who have, who are single. They don't even have a partner, and they don't have children, but they have like 6-bedroom houses, because it's about showing, oh look, I have money, and look, I can show it off. And I think it harks back to the, we used to be poor, we used to have nothing, now I have money, now I have to show it off.
But I actually thought the class system was as bad, if not even worse, in Ireland, especially going to Dublin, which is where my cousins are, and then I'd invite them along, to these do's at Lily's Bordello, and the opening night of the pub, and it was very much a kind of rugby playing set, and your ones who came from a money background, and they would be very sneery at my cousins for having real Dublin accents. Do you know what I mean?
No, there is it's more. It's more.
Cousin Danny gave him a dirty look.
Well, it's more the case in cities like Dublin, where. But if I'm from the country, so it's not so blatant in the countryside. But in Dublin, you're completely correct. You have the people who played football would be normally working class. The people who played rugby would be the doctors, the lawyers, the accountants, people like that. So and then they would be like quite snobby towards football fans or people who are not in their circle.
Alex. I went to private school, and we had football banned. They were like, no, you got to play rugby and cricket, and that's it. You can't go and play football, and they would never give the answer. About 10 years later, I went back to the school to coach football, and it was really interesting. They brought it in. They had a new headmaster, first female headmaster in a private school, one of the major private schools, and she did a survey with the kids, and the kids all said, we want football. So they brought it in, and we started coaching. But even then, when I was talking to the coaches that were full-time there, or teachers that were full-time there, they were saying there was a huge pushback from the rugby coaches who were trying to get rid of football. And it was like, well, it's the country's sport. You can't get rid of it. How? And the biggest irony is that private schools arguably were the ones that set up the rules for football.
But in World War I, what happened was, because obviously, as you say, it's public schools who invented the rules for what is modern-day football. But in World War I, they refused to cancel the league to allow the players to go to the Western Front. So they had to finish the 1914-15 season. So that was seen then in the public schools as being disloyal. And so they stuck with rugby. I mean, rugby is a far less interesting game to play, and kind of not, it's a bit too stoppy-starty, as a kid, to get into. And there's less skill level. I mean, even at my grammar school, we played football and rugby, but none of the PE teachers are very good at teaching football, because you need a level of skill. To play rugby, you just need to be big and preferably fast.
Or I'd have that. Are you deliberately goading me, Terry? Is that how you work?
Chasing.
Are you trying to crack in an argument suggesting that rugby? I mean, please go into New Zealand, go into an All Blacks pub. And
why would I want to do that? I could think of lots of interesting things to go to New Zealand for. To see a load of blokes running around chasing an egg isn't one of them.
I'll tell you what. I will. Sorry, Tan. I'll just finish on this. I spent about half a year traveling the States coaching football.
Soccer.
And, but that's actually, soccer comes from the word association, which is FA, Football Association. It's an English word that the Americans nabbed that we now hate, which is really, less so these days. But the point was, I never felt within any of the schools that I coached out there that there was any class system involved with sport. So you could go and play American football, you could go and play basketball, you could go and play soccer. It didn't really matter. Nothing was associated with class. American football was given preference, but not a single kid couldn't be given the equipment needed to go off and play it.
in America went over there, obviously football for the Italians, for a lot of the Spanish, even the Mexicans, and it was seen as not being American enough, so they wouldn't adopt football or soccer. I was over there filming during the World Cup in 1990 for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And the only station you could get the games on was a Mexican station on UHF called KMEX.
Oh, wow.
And the only people that would ever talk to us would be like the hotel staff, we're all like, sort of Central American or South American. So they were excited about the World Cup being on, and so were we. The Yanks didn't have a clue.
So it's changed quite a bit then, because I was in.
Well, yeah, I mean, there was always that thing that it was more girls played at school over there. It was a game where a lot of them would play it at some level, but it wasn't something that they wanted to watch on the TV, and also it wasn't being televised because they'd want to interrupt it every 10 minutes for adverts.
Yeah.
The adverts are an annoying factor within American sport. Tan, go on. What were we going to say?
No, I was just going to say, in Felsted, like growing up, we had very limited contact with the public school kids because the teachers wouldn't let them mix with the poor kids. And once a group of teachers actually came over and stopped the public schoolboys or the private schoolboys from playing a game of football with us. They wouldn't let them. Yeah, we were good for, the only thing we were good for, essentially, as the poor kids in the village, was taking the blame for all the crimes committed by the kids that went to the school. So yeah, I thought that was quite interesting, that what you were saying is that it's maybe seen as too working class a sport, but broadly in terms of class in this country, I think that a big part of our reverence for it comes down to the fact that we've got a monarchy, broadly speaking, and because their inequality, their status perpetrates inequality just by its very nature of existence, I think. So
I'll say one more thing on that. It goes further. I think there's something else within that. I know during the Napoleonics, it was easier to get risen in the ranks in France than it was in the UK. You had to stand out. And generally, from stuff we've read at that point, it looks as if actually the rank and file preferred to have someone with an aristocratic background because they were almost like seen as a lucky emblem. Go on, Terry.
Napoleonic Wars, 2/3 of the infantry were Irish.
Wow, I didn't know that.
There you go. The number of great traditional Irish songs that are anti-recruiting songs from the time, like Arthur MacBride, because obviously Napoleonic Wars was very soon after the 1798 rebellion, and then Robert Emmet's rebellion was at 1803 or 1805 or whatever. So there was still that, and yet one of the reasons why they recruited the Irish and Scottish, so even the Crimean War as well, was the English working class were that poor and so badly fed, because at least the Irish, when there were potatoes, the lump potato was full of vitamins, they didn't have teeth to bite the cartridges. So they had no front teeth to bite the cartridges, whereas the Irish and the Scottish troops did.
So you could have a faster reload round, couldn't you?
Well,
which is pretty much on the Kiwis because we won everything. But that's really interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Good knowledge, Terry.
Well, it's reading. It's called reading books, mate. Arthur MacBride, great version by Paul Brady. Arthur MacBride. So it's actually from the time. It's an anti-recruiting song, and probably the only other Irish song other than Fairy Tale in New York that mentions Christmas Day. There you go.
I'm going to go on to a new topic. Tan, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Oh shit! What is it?
I think you quite like it. Tories, are they dead? Are they dead in the water with everything that's been going on? I saw your video on TikTok where you literally like, where do we begin with all the crap that's going on?
Well, this is the problem that I have every week. Like, I've got a notebook. I write everything down in notebook. Literally, I started this notebook, believe it or not, a couple of weeks ago, and it is just full, mostly of swear words, I'll admit. But I hope so, but you never know. They just won't die, will they? They just keep coming back for more. But it's hard to tell at the moment. I mean, the Nazi or the National Conservatism Conference was a particular low point. Even people like Dan Hodges was saying, whoa, they normally do this like a year out of power when they're trying to like regroup. But instead they went boom, straight in with the hard right think tank funded evangelist conference. Suella Braverman spoke at that, which was particularly shocking. But it's really hard to tell. I mean, because Johnson's still lurking, isn't he? Like a twat. So it's hard to tell what's going to happen there. But then a part of me is wondering whether or not they're now using him as like a human shield to deflect from the behaviour of their own ministers, like Suella Braverman's misdemeanours. But Sunak is weak as piss, unfortunately, isn't he? He's not going to take any action. He's not going to...
Something really weird about him, isn't there?
I have friends who are aristocrats, I have friends who are upper class, I have friends who are, working class, but I'm not working class.
You weren't even looking at how much it costs to fill up your car.
I'm an enormous Coca-Cola fan. Coca, yes, I won't drink it. No Diet Coke, no Coke Zero, never any Pepsi.
Well, he's
Is it the Cockney accent you're talking about?
He's stuck, isn't he? Like, he has to appease the people that Suella represents.
Yeah.
He has to appease those people in order to maintain his position.
I don't think he's just appeasing his in-laws. He's rich. Wow. I mean, I'm telling you, if I could find myself a woman with that much money, you'd never see me for dust. I wouldn't be standing to be Prime Minister. I'd be sitting on some beach for life, drinking cocktails.
And I asked the exact same question, and you can apply that to Berlusconi, for example. Why did Berlusconi become Prime Minister? He's a billionaire. He doesn't need to do this. It's about protecting the money. This is what I think it is. Yeah, well, contact, but also about protect. So making sure that there's laws there to protect your, like, if you have huge amounts of money, and if you look at multimillionaires and billionaires, their primary concern is not paying taxes, not even giving £1 away. They prefer to spend £2 to keep £1. And this is why I think Rishi Sunak is Prime Minister. He doesn't need the money. He should, like, if he earns about £30 million passively a year through his investments. He doesn't need to be a Prime Minister. He's not doing it for the money. He's not doing it because he cares about the country. He's doing it because he wants to make sure he protects that. I don't know, is it for himself, for his wife, for his kids, or what? And if you look at Trump, the same. Why did Trump become president? To avoid the problems that he's facing now.
Legislation to protect the future, and also
like Berlusconi, for example, he became prime minister in order to get immunity from prosecution. So it's about. Sorry, go on, Terry.
Yeah, immunity.
No, I was just going to say what's terrifying about the Tories, and this is for a lifetime. I mean, I can remember my parents panicking when Ted Heath got in, because it's that whole when you live on the very edge, £1 less a week, or your dad losing his job, or a 3-day week, and we because obviously if the wages went down a bit, then you're back on free school dinners, and you've got all that kind of humiliation to go through. But I mean, Thatcher, you thought the Tories would never come back after what they did to the country there. They did nothing for anyone. There was nothing any good. If you were working class, or even if you were middle class, it didn't really do anything. It was Labour, it was a trade union that created the middle classes. And now this is like the right-wing rats out of the cage. I still don't understand how Miliband lost that election in 2015.
Well,
it just seemed crazy to me.
The press had a big part in that. I mean, the thing that really winds me up is I can relate to that. I had free school dinners. I had hand-me-down, like, blazers for school and all that kind of stuff. And, what really...
I like to call that recycling now, darling.
Yeah, it's repurposing. But what really pisses me off about it is, while we're scrabbling around in the dirt saving pennies, and we'll get fined significant sums of money if we just, slightly fuck up our taxes, those bastards are taking tens of thousands from lobby, from different companies to lobby on, their behalf, and, gambling companies, which make historically poorer places even poorer. And they're just legislating in their own interests and for their vested
interests. It's feudalism.
Ours.
It's feudalism. In feudal times, the robber barons, they paid no taxes. The serfs and the peasants paid all the taxes. I mean, and it's the same now. We pay all the taxes, and they take it all and shove it offshore. Where's all that public money going? That Circle have had, and all these other kind of companies. All the PPE companies. Most of it's gone offshore. We can't trace it. We don't know who shoved it off there.
It's funny how you see people like Aaron Banks going on Twitter going, oh, look, this company's left. It's gone. It's all because of the government. And it's not this oh, they don't love our country. They haven't stayed in here. Why don't they love our country? But for anything else, they'll use that as their first excuse. But when it's business, it's like, no, nationalism, nothing to do with that. And then I think the other thing is, and this is interesting, you brought up the landlords, there's also the freeholds, which I think is a feudal system. You pay 400, 500,000 for a small place in a block of flats, and then you find out that actually you don't really own it, that it's owned only for 99 years, that you have to pay rent. And if you do anything that might be within the conditions of those rules that mess up the property, they can actually take the property away from you. If you don't pay, they can take the property away from you.
Even if you own the freehold, you don't actually own the land that your property is on. What you have is an agreement of tenure, like a 12th century, peasant had. You know what I mean? So the only person who's allowed to own land is the king, and what's the in this country. And we're probably the only modern country in the world where the most valuable asset, land, is non-taxable. One of the best ways to tax the rich, where they can't hide it offshore, is just go, right, land is now taxed. If you pay council tax on a one-bedroom studio flat or whatever every year, why can you own 200,000 acres of land and not pay a penny on it? In places like the USA and elsewhere, the tax per acre, aren't they, per year? And that creates a real, if you like, a real kind of free market in land. And that would bring house prices back. That would bring land. And you can't even find out who owns land. Do you know what I mean? Over here, it's something sacred. And it's real. And that in itself is very feudal. It's theft. And nothing would, if you think about allowing people to buy the council houses at a discount, because you could always buy a council house. What Thatcher did was she brought in this idea, if you'd lived in it for 20 years, you could buy it at a discount. Where she was horrible was she wouldn't let local councils then spend that money on building new council houses, which is really cynical, nasty. But imagine if you created a free market in land, the amount of reheating of our economy that would create. But of course, would be no good for the landed gentry types. That's their tax dodge. I mean, didn't Cameron's father-in-law own something mad like 80,000 acres of like pine forest or whatever in Scotland? Something weird like that. And one of the things that the Scottish government were going to do, if Scotland got independence, was bring in a land tax. So that, hence the panic.
I wonder why we're not taught about any of this in school.
I'm going to throw out 3 questions, see if you can guess the answer to this. Who owns the seabed? Who owns the seabed in the UK?
Well, the king now.
Tory reckons the king. Who owns the seabed in the UK surrounding?
The bed of the sea.
The bed of the sea.
Well, it's gonna be those it's gonna be the royals, isn't it? It's got to be. It's got to be the royal family.
Max?
Poseidon.
Should say Manon MacTair, shouldn't he? He's the Celtic god of the sea.
Oh dear. Yeah, it is the king. It is the king. Who owns Regent Street?
Is it Duke of Westminster?
Duke of Westminster. Max?
I don't know, a private company.
Pan?
No idea.
Crown Estate, so it's the king. And then the final question is, Devil's Arse. It's a cave. Who owns that, do you think? Is it the council, the government, or the king?
Oh, it'd be the king. The only person who's allowed to own land in Britain.
I was going to say Jacob Rees-Mogg, according to the name, but
I was going to say Prince Andrew, based on the same.
But is it Nottingham Castle where there's Mortimer's Hole, where a certain king got killed by having a red hot poker shoved up his jacksie?
Yeah, I can't remember the king.
What a way to go!
Yeah,
Mortimer's Hole.
Ideal. No.
But I mean, you read. People want to bring back hanging. Public hanging.
Oh,
of course. Well, that's why you should never have referendums, should you?
No, well, no. I mean, that's what I was worried about with the National Conservatism Conference, to be honest with you, because some of the people speaking there, like that J.D. Vance, the senator that was a speaker, he's like pushing that great replacement theory nonsense. And he's the one who also referred to immigrants in America as like an invasion, using the same dehumanizing rhetoric. And I'm worrying because they're like, well, they're evangelists, but they don't mind, electrocuting people or giving them the injection to kill them. But a part of me is wondering if, like, they're gonna try and do that. But I just don't think it will wash here. I don't think that level of it gets worse.
I always wonder what the
Iroquois
Indians and the Cherokee thought about those immigrants invading.
That's the thing. That's the irony. And it sets the precedent. I mean, this is the thing with I don't agree with it, but the January 6th thing, you can argue that America has the precedent of we'll have a revolution, get rid of government. It set that precedent, as well as stealing land and immigration being the building blocks of the country. And yet you've got people pushing back at that. But I mean, it's no different here. We've got people who are first, second generation, and they're saying we're pulling up the ladder, we don't want anyone else in. I mean, I think there was a stat, I think Femi brought it up, where he said the amount of urban housing in the UK is the equivalent of the tidal land lost and gained on a daily basis in the UK. The problem really seems to be is that people don't want housing in the south, and we don't seem to have found a way of getting people to use the entire spectrum of the UK. People don't seem to want to go to north. They're migrating south and into London. People don't want to migrate to Scotland.
I mean, you can get down to London from Manchester, all right, but you try getting from Manchester to Hull, west to east. If I want to get a train to Norwich, 5 hours from Manchester. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it?
That's crazy.
In this day and age.
But they don't invest in the north, like they haven't invested in the infrastructure for years and years and years. And when you look at what they did to the north with austerity, and then with the so-called levelling up funds,
Thatcher destroyed the north.
Well, she did initially, but then the Tories came along after Labour and destroyed it with austerity. And then with their so-called levelling up fund, they put that all into rich southern Tory constituencies, taking more money in infrastructure away from the north. So people say, oh, well, they paint the north as a less desirable place to live. It's because the north has been systematically underfunded for decades.
And if you want investment, you need infrastructure. And if you don't have infrastructure, you're not going to get investment.
Well, I mean, the weird thing is you take somewhere like Greater London and the transport links. So every time they improve the transport links in Greater London, you might live in some kind of Kippo equivalent of Burnley, but you can get into the centre of London in like 25 minutes. Yeah. And it's and so your house suddenly becomes worth a fortune. But it's northern taxpayers that are subsidising you and what you've made, because we don't get the same. Even in Manchester, our tram fares are really expensive compared to the tube and stuff like that. Bus fares in London are cheaper than up here because per person, we don't get subsidised the way a person living in Greater London at the southeast gets.
I think a single in London's £2.90. What's the tram in Manchester?
I've got no idea. I don't go on the tram. I don't travel steerage either if I go anywhere. First class. I might do standard premium. Though,
Terry's like Nigel Farage. He has a chauffeur-driven, chauffeur-driven Range Rover.
The Range Rover's driven by two Southerners. Like there's Southerners up front.
You have to have these standards and don't let them drop too much, even if your whole life's a hollow pretense.
I'll tell you what I would think would make a change, and they'll never do it. Not the Conservatives. I doubt that Labour got. I've got to be frank. I don't think Labour got the brains to do it. I'd shift Parliament to Hull, and you see how quickly the infrastructure gets redeveloped in the north.
I don't think Labour would do it. Shift Parliament to Hull.
Well, I mean, there was that argument about the actual middle of Britain is just below the Cheviots, isn't it? And talk about building a separate government place there, a bit like Brasilia in Brazil, just where you put all government thingies. And this was being talked about years back, as one of those sort of weird ideas. But again, now with people working from home, you can still scatter it about. I mean, obviously, Rees-Mogg has got this idea that all civil servants should go into work, when in fact that doesn't work. So often that they have to turn up so many days every 2 weeks or whatever to go in, and it's just them in the office on their own.
Yeah.
But it's because obviously people like Richard Tice and Morgan, all them, they've got massive investments.
They own commercial buildings, yeah.
Whereas I know for a fact that people like Capita, they've been flogging off office space.
They have.
But we don't get told this. Do you know what I mean? And it's because there's so much money tied up from these people with, in static stuff like bricks and mortar in this country. Whereas, when everyone had the oil crisis, Germany, who didn't even have any oil and are now suffering because they relied on the Russians for oil, they reinvested in all their infrastructure and their industries. We didn't. We just closed them all down, and used North Sea oil, to pay for people to be out of work, for political reasons, spending millions to defeat the mining union and all the rest of it. I mean, just dreadful. This country's like a basket case, really, and has been for a long time.
Right. Yeah, it's fucked.
The worst thing is, and it's something that was brought up, we've got loads of potential. It's just that we've got a government that doesn't see it. And I'm not convinced so far with Labour's policies.
What if you've got a Labour leader and he loses an election? Kick him out. Don't let him sit again. Get rid and put somebody else in there.
Well, yeah, and this is the thing. This is why, people accuse me of being biased. Well, I'm a Labour member. I'm going to be a bit biased, but I don't base anything on hypothesis. And also, you've got to look at the climate in which Labour are trying to win an election this time. Everything is fucked. Everything's on fire. None of the regular, none of the regular rules apply. And most of our broadcasters and media are all really pro-Tory. So they've got to, it's a Herculean effort. They're spinning about 12 plates. So I don't judge them by the climate within which they're trying to win an election, if that makes sense. And if that makes me kind of biased or whatever, fair enough. But they're up against it, is all I'll say. So
I mean, they always were. I think with the culture wars thing more so now. I mean, for whatever happened last time round with Brexit, especially, it just let all the right-wing rats out of the cage.
The Overton window.
The sort of people who were never going to be in power because they're just too weird. They don't know what they want. They are literally the dog that chased a motorbike and then caught it. What does it do with it now?
Yeah,
and
that's a great analogy.
Exactly.
Even if all the boats got stopped, everything else, nothing good is going to come out of any of it. There's nothing there for any of us.
Yeah, but it's all just tools to distract. The boats. Why aren't we talking about, why aren't they talking about the lack of housing? Boats. Why aren't they talking about the problems with the NHS? Boats. Why aren't they talking? So everything is about distracting. 13 years of distraction. And for Labour, my issue with Labour is probably just that they don't. I really wish Keir Starmer was a bit more, ranty, in the House of Commons, say, for fuck's sake, or something like this. I know he can't do that. I would love that, yeah. I love that, but I understand that he has. I think it was James O'Brien who described it as he's trying to carry, fine china across an ice rink. So he has this. It's looking more and more likely that Labour are going to win, but he better not fuck up, because there's a real risk that he can. He could say the wrong thing. He could eat a bacon sandwich the wrong way, and the media would eat him for it. And there is this mountain, as you said. There's this the media, pretty much all of the media is against the Labour Party. So whatever they do, they're going to be criticised for it. And I think it's going to be, when they actually are in power, they're going to be criticised no matter what.
But that's always been the case, hasn't it? Yeah. That was always the case. And it's quite strange, when you talk to, because I've always voted Labour, but you talk to, the kind of the massive Jeremy Corbyn fans, and you're going, well, he seemed to attract it. He went out of his way to get himself bad press and go off subject. I thought he was a bit thick, to be honest with you. And then it's like, and then he hid. So he didn't even stand the storm. He'd say these things and he'd hide. I remember thinking, great, we've got a left-wing leader of the Labour Party.
In his defence.
But then he wasn't the kind of intellect that a Michael Foot was. And then he came in, and within 3 weeks, he starts banging on about the Falklands. And you're going, well, do you know what, mate? Listen, you might have a point, but shut the F up. This is not the time.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
You don't need to be talking about this. Why?
That's why I think Starmer's
and then the kind of monomania about Palestine. Look, we all know it's dreadful, but there's other places in the world, like the Stop the War Coalition. So they want to stop the war in, there or Iraq, but they don't want to stop the war in Syria or stop the war in Ukraine in 2014 or stop the Chinese killing the Uyghur Muslims. And you're going, well, you either want to stop all wars or you don't want to stop any of them. So it's this kind of strange monomania, you know, and these obsessions. And you're thinking, well, that's great. Deal with them, but get in power first, please.
Yeah.
So I'll finish off on this. The thing he lacks is charisma and a clear policy. And the reason that charisma is important, we can see from history, is that it sells your policy. This is part of the reason. This is part of the reason why Liz trusts Faye. I would turn around and say he must have had something if he's able to get onto the Glastonbury stage and he's got a youth movement. I'm not saying he did.
No, my feelings about Corbyn were a bit like, do you remember being there with Peter Sellers? You know, Chance the Gardener, and everyone projected, you know, their idea of what he should be onto him. So suddenly they needed a messiah. So Corbyn became some sort of messianic
That's no different
figure.
to Obama. Obama didn't have. If you read his policies beforehand, all he said was hope and change. But everyone considered him to have charisma because he had a bit of wit.
I still liked him. I thought Obama was great. He had the smarts, didn't he? And it's much more. There's less room for manoeuvre in America than even here. But again, my whole thing with Starmer is, well, that's it. It's either Starmer or the Tories. What do you want?
Exactly.
If you want the Tories again, you've already done that. Time to shut it now.
Indeed it is. Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Be sure to tune in next week for another exciting story from the files of Police Squad.